Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for coming. I have a kind of packed lecture because I never know what I can leave out, so I'll try and move on. Basically, a lot of people wonder if you can study love. And, of course, I think you can, because I do. But some people, it's often say that it's left to the poets. And there are wonderful things, actually, through novelists and poetry that one learns about love. So I don't say that it isn't a good stimulus. There's a lot of classical philosophers who've talked about love and made, I think, observations about it that are really profound. I think it's really interesting to see what kids say about love. These are statements that they made on the internet, just pulled off the internet. These are 4 to 8-year-olds. I think they said love is the first feeling you feel before all the bad stuff gets in the way. These are very current. When someone loves you, the way they say your name is different. You know that your name is safe in their mouth. When a girl puts on perfume and a boy puts on shaving cologne and they go out and smell each other. It's more profound than they know. When mommy sees daddy on the toilet and doesn't think it's gross. And that really may be love. Some undergraduates, here's what they said. Hard to find, hard to get rid of. So cynical, so young. Readiness, compatibility, history, like that. A noxious plague sent from hell to punish us for having fun. As an English major, I guess. Like a roller coaster, it has its ups and downs, sometimes just makes you sick. An uncontrollable attraction between two people who were destined to be together since the beginning of time. There's someone whose heart is going to be broken. A biochemical event in the brain. Something you say when you're very drunk. So everybody has an opinion. This is a comment about something that everybody thinks about. And so when I go and study love, and I think what other people do in sex and relationships, you don't go back from the personal, what people feel, what they say they think, what they've experienced in their life, and then you also try and think of, well, what can we learn about the most important things about love and sex and relationships, which is they're in our lives. How can we do them better? How can we have a relationship? And what does science tell us that might inform us about ourselves and others? Basically, there's several schools of looking at this. One is pretty much the biology and the sociobiology and the psychobiology. Helen Fisher has done a lot of this work. She's in the New York area, and she has looked at the evolutionary aspect of our mammalian selves that across cultures and maybe even across animals, there are certain kinds of behaviors as attraction and pairing goes on. Some of these, if you're interested in reading them, in books about the kinds of things that people share, the smiles, the way people hold their heads, the permission to get closer, whether someone backs away or leans in, the gaze. I mean, the gaze of all of these things, I think, is the most interesting one, because it is true that when people are showing interest to each other, they will lock eyes more than they would otherwise. And if somebody turns their eyes away, that tells you a lot. Eyes are either one of two things. They're either saying, let's get together, or I dare you. I mean, for example, if somebody has eyes and there's no sexual thing going on, it's usually a challenge. So the gaze is really important, and it's almost always part of couples that are moving towards love or sex or both. So I do think we're like other mammals. I'm not going to go into it. I don't have time. There's lots of other animals that do a lot of these behaviors, especially our closest relatives. And there are often things in terms of just looking at us as a mammal and a species that mean that we are in fact giving comfort and we are connecting. Anything that puts skin on skin is an intimate relationship of sorts. Holding hands, whether it's two little kids together or adults or people or two people dating and they hold hands, suddenly a different kind of connection has been made. There's lots of interesting research about that. If I had time, if you want to ask me about some of the touching research, I think it's really interesting. So basically, we're going to talk about things that are our basic human impulses, us as an animal, us as a biology, and also the social circumstances under which we live, how we as human interpret things or misinterpret things, and what the research gives us in terms of trying to be better in relationships. But I never go away completely from the biological, because the biological is always involved in human relationships. Even I, as a sociologist or social psychologist, have to take that into account. We have 3 hormonal systems that work on us when you look at relationships, sex, and love. One of them is dopamine. This is a hormone that's produced when we crave something. When the kind of thing where you're writing somebody's name in your desk, when you're a little kid, or you have obsessive, continuing thought of somebody you've just met. That's your dopamine system kicking in and literally getting you on a hormone addiction of obsessive, of interest. The androgens, that's estrogen and testosterone. We think of those as separate, but they're kind of in a loop. And basically, those are the arousal systems, or what you would call the lust systems. They're not about love, they're about lust. They're about desire, and they can be either in a love relationship or outside of it. And then the third hormone that's really important here is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bliss hormone. When I'm near you, I feel good. I want to be with you. I want to hold your hand. I want to cuddle up. When do men and women secrete the most oxytocin? For women and men both, not during sex, but during orgasm. Sex, whatever it is, might produce some, but the most is actually associated with orgasm. There's one other time that only women produce a lot of oxytocin, because only women can do it, and that's breastfeeding. Big sources of oxytocin. Probably saying, this screamy little thing that is peeing all over me, I love it. Because the oxytocin is just flowing between us. Just think about it objectively. So our brain is really, therefore, a brain that was built for love, built for lust, built for connection, built for emotion, built for the kinds of things we're talking about today. There are several kinds of research, one of which I really like, is they put people through an MRI machine and ask them, one, to hold the picture of somebody who is their friend, and another person to show the picture of somebody they've been with a long time, and a third person, these are in separate things, to show the picture of someone they're passionately engaged with. Different parts of the brain light up. They can blind through those pictures, know who is the friend, who has the passionate engagement, who has the long-term partner. So we have a brain that's individuated, and those hormones are working for both romance, a different one for lust, and a different one for connection. And some people bring out one in us, some people bring out another, and some people bring out all 3. The brain also does another kind of thing that I think is important in our discussion of love. It has people who study the brain look at its 2 main reactions to life. Basically, fear, this isn't good for me, and safety, this is. This will help me survive, and this threatens me. These are the kinds of a million things every animal has to have, or they're going to be slaughtered. They don't know who to trust. They don't know what's good for them or not. So it's pretty instinctual. So these kinds of big emotion, one makes us run to somebody, safe, good, happy, it's going to help me. And some of them say, unsafe, I'm getting out of here. This doesn't look good for me. And those 2 emotions are either connecting us or driving us away. Let's talk about this from one other kind of psychology, which is saying, okay, if we're talking about love and those are our emotions, this is the brain, those are the hormones, how early does it start? I don't know how many of you have had a basic psych class, but usually you'll get some stuff on attachment. Attachment theory is a big deal, and basically it's saying from the very earliest days, from your connection with your mother, your connection with your world, you're either having those go-to, it's safe feelings, or no, it's not, and that is going to affect your later attachments. So have any of you seen this film where they show a little baby and a mom? And they show, it's an old film, it's like from the 70s, I think, maybe even earlier. And it shows a mom with a baby of about 8 or 9 months. The mom goes up to the baby and is playing with it, and then she leaves for about 10 seconds. And they do this with a number of babies and another number of moms. And they show different reactions to the baby. Some babies look up, their mother's gone, and they just keep playing until she shows up again. They're feeling pretty secure about her. They don't think she's going to disappear. Other babies, as soon as they look up and their mom's not there, they're going berserk. They're crying, "Where's my mom? I'm scared silly." And the third baby looks up, is extremely upset, but instead of crying, what they do is when the mom comes back, they go, "I hate you. You did this to me." And attachment people talk about it as a secure attachment, an ambivalent or attachment that somehow becomes so scary of loss that people shut themselves down, so they avoid connection, and insecure attachment. If somebody isn't there for you, you now become very needy. Where are they? I need you. Tell me I'm okay. Do you love me? Tell me again. Now, they will say, I'm not going to go into everything. I have my slides because I won't have enough time. But you can see this is the kind of thing, if you read those 3 paragraphs, those paragraphs are of someone secure, someone avoidant, and someone insecure. And if you take a look at that, that's some of the kinds of ways people would take a look at themselves and then say, maybe I got that from very early on, even before I knew it. Maybe there was something about my background that made it dangerous, unsafe, a little scary to attach securely, not just to anyone, but even the person I love, even as I go through relationships. Or you're with somebody who, when they get close, they go, "This isn't safe. I don't really feel good. I'm going to break up with this person because I'm getting too close. I might be dependent, and I don't trust people, so I've got to get out." So this explains those kinds of things where some people are very securely attached. They feel like, yeah, I can trust people. Some people are insecurely attached. I don't trust them, so I'm going to try and be the very best I can. I'm going to be there for them, and I'm going to call. And if they haven't told me they're coming in, I'm going to worry about if they were someone else, etc. And the third ones are, the way I deal with this kind of fear is to shut myself down and not feel too dependent, too much in love. Whether or not that's these 3 different types have adult ramifications is, I think, a matter for research. Attachment theorists believe they do, and here's a kind of profile that they would say, comes from these early beginnings where people have a profile if they're insecure or avoidant or secure. And obviously somebody who is able to trust and feel comfortable with relationships is more likely both to pursue them and to be able to deal with them. Big question. Is this a determined thing from childhood if you had a rough childhood, or an inconsistent parenting, or a mom that abandoned you, etc.? I think as a sociologist looking at lots of interaction later, I don't think so. I think people reset according to what the life is going on as they go on. But some people might say that it's extremely hard and you'd have to be very psychologically aware to get over some of these approaches. So sometimes they'll give tests like this one, where you see all these circles, and they'll say to one partner, okay, which of these circles most represents how you'd like to be in a relationship? Parallel, the self and the other have very different spheres, all the way to they're almost one circle. And they'll see if the 2 people are on the same kind of vision of the relationship, and if they're far away, they'll counsel them on that a bit. Regardless of how we feel, regardless of how good we are at it, most people pair up. Most people have a drive to be with somebody else, whether it's same or opposite sex. But the question then becomes, well, why him? Why her? Why that relationship? Then we get into a different level of love science, which is, okay, so we want to love, we like sex, we want a pair, we're maybe afraid of it, we're maybe secure of it, but why one person versus the other? Now, I have to say right now, if I could always forecast one person versus the other, I would make a big business of that. But we can make assessments from the research about why one person versus another. First of all, every culture has its archetypes. It's this is what is good looking. This is what is worthwhile. And it resets as culture and history goes on. But we set visions of what's desirable. Then we do and tend to look, most research says, about 80% similar. We tend to look for people who are very much like us, with the interesting caveat that if they're too much like us, we feel like they're our brother or sister, and other kinds of things kick in. We don't want that. So you have to have about 80% similarity, it seems, and about 20% difference for people to connect in a romantic way. What are the things that they tend to like in common? Aspiration, goals, values, race. We tend to marry more often in race and ethnicity. But things that often trump race and ethnicity and some of those other things are money and status. Those seem in every culture. You know, if you have many more yams to give her in some culture, she's interested in you. Or if she comes from high status group, that may in fact be more interesting to you. The sociobiologists would say appearances of health, symmetrical faces. There's a whole interesting group of research on what kinds of biology is similar and what's different that works. For most men and women, though, you name it, the fact is the most important thing in their life is a relationship. This is from a study I did. It's got more than 100,000 people in it. I did it with a group of people. We asked them, you know, what is your happiness most linked into? And it's interesting that the greatest number of people, more than half, said it was their relationship. And the choices up there are pretty solid choices. Their religion, their kids, their health, their economics, their, you know, their work. But most people said the relationship. So I think that's pretty profound. In fact, relationships are so important. I think this study really blew me away. It said, well, what's basically related to life and death? What are the things that really matter? And the really important thing are dense emotional relationship. By dense, I mean several, right? More than one. And this was from a study at Brigham Young University from a medical team. They looked at thousands of people's health records and their relationship records, and what they came out with is that the social relationships were more likely to predict how long someone lived and how healthy they lived than whether or not they smoked, whether or not they were overweight, whether or not they had high cholesterol, hypertension, whether they exercised or not, or alcoholism. Those are all kind of deadly things, but it was more important that they had a really rich social life than any of those. So, if we believe that relationships are at the center of what make people happy, and if we believe that the center of what makes them healthy, of course we're going to study it. And of course it really matters. You may know this. The best data on relationships and life cycle are by insurance companies, because they want to set the rates against the likelihood of your death. So the biggest thing they're going to take, who do you think pays the highest premium on their life insurance? Want to guess? Single men, you bet. Because married men have women taking care of them, or gay men have another partner looking at them, but single men really go downhill. Unless they have, of course, rich social relationships like kids and friends, etc. But women are more likely to build those than men. So the fact is that these things are really critically important, and that means what we want to do is keep people in relationships. One of the things we hear about, divorce, it's said, it's not just all that moral stuff, it's like people in relationships live longer and healthier. Why wouldn't we want to promote that? So, psychologists take a look at early stuff, and they'll say that, that how somebody is as a child may mean it's harder for them to be in a long-term relationship. Then they also look at qualities of any individual, if high neuroticism, things like that. If they're not having a really good time in life, they're probably not going to be interested or good at a relationship either. Nobody says it's easy. Woody Allen has great quotes for most things. Life is full of misery, loneliness, and suffering, and it's over much too soon. So the idea is no matter it's difficult, we're still alive. We still want to be alive. what the research shows is that your general happiness does, in fact, have a high prediction of your relationship happiness. This particular study, which was interesting, is of women in their yearbook. And they just took some yearbooks at random and looked at the people who smiled and the people who didn't. The people who smiled in the yearbook picture were much more likely to be together with a long-term partner than those who did not. So your attitudes for life is really important. On the other hand, a lot of things that people say to you about life or about relationships are somewhat dependent on the circumstances under which you're with, and that could be stress. For example, one of my favorite studies was done in British Columbia. It has a woman on a bridge. One's a fixed bridge, really steady, no fear, and a windy day, a bunch of college guys. She's a young woman. She's very attractive. Cross the bridge, and she says, I'm just doing a little study, and then she gives her number saying, if you really want to talk to me about the study, please call. She does the same thing on the same day with, again, random group of guys, but this is on a swinging bridge. This goes over a canyon, and in wind, this thing is really, I've been on it, it's pretty scary. It's safe, but scary. And then she tells those guys, again, you want to hear more about the study, please call me. So, as you might guess from why I'm saying this, more than twice of the guys on the swinging bridge called than from the stable bridge. They're not thinking, of course, they're getting aroused by the circumstances. For example, men in wartime, those kinds of situations, anything that makes you under threat, unsure of yourself, scared, may in fact get all your systems moving, and you think it's just because it's this particular woman. No, it's not the woman. It was the circumstances under which you met her. There's another study like that, too. This one, I don't think you can get past human subjects these days. You showed a bunch of college guys, pretty nude pictures of women. One was a blonde, one's a brunette, one's a redhead. And they're wired up to hear their heartbeat. So they hear when they're looking at a particular sexy picture, lub-dub, lub-dub. You know, that's their heart. And then when they see one picture that's really good, their heart goes faster. So at the end of the experiment, they ask the guys which picture you'd like. So, of course, they take the picture where they heard themselves, their body was responding very fast. Their heartbeat was going faster, except it was a false heartbeat. It wasn't really their heartbeat. It was randomly assigned to them. So they picked the picture they thought their body was telling them was really cool. But that was just random. They weren't listening to their head. They weren't listening to their experience. They were being stressed by the heartbeat and took it to be real. So, basically, we're trying to figure out why people are attracted to each other. It's tough. We're trying to figure it out all the time. A lot of the research on love and sex is on fixing it and helping people understand each other. So, So communication is one of the major things we study. This is a really popular book. How many of you have read The Love Languages? Oh, okay. This book has really been a very popular seller. A guy by Chapman wrote it. He wrote the 5 love languages. These are the ways people tend to show love and feel love, like it's being given to them. One is being touched, or sexuality. One is being around each other, quality time. One is words of affirmation, being told I love you, or saying I love you. Acts of service, this is somebody, taking care of your car, or doing things for you, making dinner when you're tired, all those kinds of things. And the other is receiving gifts, presents, flowers, whatever. And what they found is that not everybody, of course, has the same love language. I've done research on this myself, where I asked people to, in long-term relationships, male and female in these cases, just list from 1 to 5 what's the way you want to show love and what's the way you like to receive it. And then their partner does the same thing, and you say also to your partner, how do you think your partner likes to receive it? What's their rating? And they're never more than 50% correct. Never. These are couples that have been together 10 years or more. In other words, there's not a lot of communication on how you want to be shown love, and there's not a lot of communication of your partner saying, here's what I need. People make assumptions, they may not be true. So this is the kind of thing people are doing on communication, trying to understand why sometimes people are ineffective in terms of their partner feeling loved, even when the partner feels they're showing it all the time. But they're showing it the way they would like to get it, often rather than what their partner wants. So I have a new golden rule. I know the golden rule is do unto others as you would have done unto you. My golden rule is do unto others as they would have done unto themselves. And that means understanding who you're with, even though you think you do. So, one of the things people think is that women want more romance than men. And it's true that women read more romance books and go and look at more romance movies. But the fact is, when you ask people, do you get enough romance in your life? And this is a large random study. It's the men who are more likely to say, I don't feel I get enough. In this study, this is a huge difference. 30% of the women, variety of ages, colors, everything, 30% of the women said, I don't get enough romance. I don't get enough of that. 60% of the men did. So twice as many men thought they didn't get enough romance. Why? Well, women get the gifts. Women want the guy to say, I love you. Women expect acts of service, et cetera, et cetera. The men don't get it back. So it's interesting that they feel that way, and they start to feel not loved, not taken care of, et cetera. That's when we get into the next part of love research, which is what happens when things break down. What is causing love to be interfered with, either not happen or not kept up? A lot of research. I don't know if you've heard of Gottman's research. They had a lot of publicity at one point. Basically, they find that these 4 things, when they all come together, really say the relationship is going down the tubes. And the way they did it was not just by asking people questions. They videotaped husbands and wives talking in split screens. And they coded the kind of thing that highly troubled couples did. So these 4, they called the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. What happens at the end of the world, i.e., in this case, the end of the relationship. The 4 things are criticism, which is, it's not that I hate being late. It's like, you make me late. You're the kind of person that doesn't care about time. I just think that you are a selfish person. It's not the problem. It's the person. And they get criticized. So that's the first horseman. The second, that's criticism. I actually didn't do it in line. Stonewalling is you refuse to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. You start to talk about it. The other person leaves. They slam the doors. They read the paper. They don't engage. That's the only one of these, by the way, that happens to be gendered. It's more male than female. Defensiveness. Nothing ever gets handled because I'm so threatened by what you said about me that I come right back at you. If you say, this is really bothering me, there's clothes all over the place, and I really need it to be orderly, and you say, I put clothes on the place. You know what you do? You don't even fold anything, and besides that, you never call my mother, which is called stockpiling, and it's also defensive because the first thing never got help because the other person's back at you. And the last one is contempt. This is an interesting one, because it's visual as well as verbal. Verbal, we know. How could you be so stupid? Now, that's not just criticism. That's contempt, right? Stupid. We all know how that feels. But it's also smirks and rolling of eyes. And, they show how when one husband is talking to this wife who's upset with him, she's sitting there and her face is like this. When you ask her if she showed contempt, she says, of course not. And until you show them the pictures and they have to face it, this is a face that's just saying, what an ass, right? So these four things, if they're all there, this couple is in big trouble. Other things like yelling or having big passionate arguments or disagreeing on stuff, they might be more flashy, but they're not as dangerous, according to the research, as this kind of stuff. What kinds of things have they found might help? Because the research goes, how do we maintain love when there's, what can we do that's positive and not just notice what's negative? Well, here's a few things. And this is a voluminous literature, so I'm just giving you some stuff. One of the things are called soft startups. That is, how do you begin an argument means how it will end. Instead of saying, you're a slob, you say, can we talk about the house? Can we talk about the closet? One's a soft start, the other, you slob, is obviously going to start it with an explosion. What's a bid? A bid is an apology or a redirection that a lot of people don't notice. So, for example, let's say the wife says, we never go out. So the husband, of course, never and always are words that we should all forget, right? But she says, you should never go out. And the husband says, well, okay, let's go out tonight. And she says, no, I don't want to go out tonight. He's made a bid. She's rebuffed it. It probably doesn't get made again. So those kind of bids are really important. If somebody gives the slightest turning towards you, sorry about that. You're always sorry and you never do anything. End of sorry. So those kinds of bids are moments to repair that some people take. Oh, I thank you for saying you're sorry. And some people don't. Words matter. What kinds of words people use. This is by a book. This isn't from the Gottmans. This is by a guy named Ruiz called The 5 Agreements. Four Agreements. I don't know if anybody's read that. It's a really good book. And he says basically words matter, and that means you have to be more careful with your partner than anyone else in your life because words stick. How many of you have had somebody say something to you that mattered to you, a father, a mother, a brother, or ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, that you will never forget? It's embedded in your life forever. Someone who said you were fat or too skinny or a bad lover or idiot or whatever it was, it just never goes away. It might be dealt with, but it doesn't get forgotten. So words are very important in what you say to each other because they're so sticky. And interpreting. Harville Hendricks, this is a very popular kind of therapy that they did. Imago therapy goes, well, all right. If we're having misunderstandings, we're going to go down to the basics. When I say something, you're going to tell me what you heard. And it's amazing when you can hear person say, I'd really like to go to my mother's house. And the other person says, I heard that you're criticizing me for not going to your mother's house, so enough. No, I just said, and I mean really breaking it down to none of the presumptions, the assumptions, the traveling down the road of where it's going, but really reestablishing rather clear communication patterns. These are all things that have been discovered by relationship science, and they all can help if they're looked at. Sorry, I'm doing the wrong thing. So, those are some of the things in communication. But what about the things of passion? I mean, relationships just aren't, rational, orderly things. They're often passionate ones of desire, of feeling lost, of feeling ambivalent, of being worried, all the kinds of things I told in the beginning. Basically, sometimes things of passion get confusing about what they mean, and they take people down difficult roads. Jealousy, and the study of jealousy, is particularly scary in adolescence, because a lot of times people feel like if they're insecure, that, and of course most adolescents are, that jealousy is a proof of love. That if your boyfriend, gets violent with you because, he saw you with another guy, that's going to mean something about love. And of course, no, it doesn't. It just means something about insecurity. But these kinds of emotions can be used and interpreted in different ways. Passion is, in fact, a lighting up of the brain that generally starts, that can happen a lot in relationships. This woman's just doing it over chocolate, but is really an important part of trying to understand why things go south in a lot of relationships. If when passion and love are together, you get these kinds of scenes of, there you are in Paris and everything is wonderful. When passion is part of a insecure reflex, or passion without love, it's not about relationships. Romance and passion are often thought to incite each other, and of course, if the romance part of it is not so dangerous because it means there's some connection to the person. But it's very different from different countries. Basically, this is more of the study. I think the slide should have been with the other one, talking about a difference in terms of who's feeling romantic or not. But I think the interesting thing here is those are United States figures. In United States figures, twice as many men as women feel they're not getting enough romance. But we looked at this in about 10 countries. We translated the questionnaires into 10 different languages. And the biggest difference was in China, where the figures were reversed. Almost 70% of the women felt they weren't getting enough romance there, and much, much fewer of the men. So it really does depend on sort of cultural traits. Basically, the romance countries really are the romance countries. That's what we found in the study. The fewest men who felt deprived of romance were in the romance countries. And there were other things as well, like the romance countries were more likely to do public displays of affection. They were more likely to say, I love you more. They were more likely to have more frequent sexuality between couples. And they were actually happier about relationships even when they were poorer and more disadvantaged than a comparable group of people. Yet, this said about love and romance, the question is also, why are women so fixated on our country in terms of not so much romance, but marriage, pairing? I think women have some differences than men on this. And basically, I think it depends on the culture, and it depends on biology both. I put up a couple of reasons here why women would be more intense about the subject. First of all, that there's been a lot of saying that, if a woman isn't married, somehow she's, or in a relationship of a long-term commitment, that somehow she's damaged in some way. There's the biology of it. If she wants children, she has a much tighter timeline than a guy does, unless he too wants to be a young parent. We have glorified and marketed weddings in this culture so that it is a billion and many billion-dollar industry. So we are being advertised about how to have, the Bridezilla Vision, where, there's the wedding dress, and there's the ring, and there's the flowers, and there's the colors. It's not only is it a huge industry, but something like, I think it's like somewhere about a third of people sometimes take out loans to do this, some of whom to get second mortgages on their place, etc. It also is way out of line in cost to what people earn or have. So there's also a certain imagery about, why women need a man, even though, we're no longer in the West or someplace where you actually need a protector in the same way. But that imagery comes up. So we still find that even though women, when they're in relationships, feel they're mostly getting enough romance, they are oriented towards relationships in a much more intense way. What are some of those differences in terms of sexuality? So let me talk about sex now for a while. A lot of the research is antagonistic to each other about male and female sexuality. In this particular vision, female sexuality, arousal, desire, is based on relationship issues and arousing somebody physically, whereas men's sexuality is seen as much more automatic and not so tied into the relationship. But sex is really important for relationships, and first I'm going to talk about it physiologically, and second I'm going to talk about it psychologically. Actually, there's research that if you have a steady sex life, you're not only more likely to be happy, we'll talk about that, you're likely to live longer. It's particularly true for guys. This is a very long, big study that was done in Ireland, in England. And basically it said that men who have 3 or more orgasms a week are 50% less likely to die from heart disease. It was done in a stroke conference. Those are big numbers. That's not a small thing. There's another piece of research, 2004, a meta-study from the Journal of the American Medical Association that said that men who had, quote-unquote, 21 emissions, i.e. ejaculations, a month were much more likely to be healthy. And this woman from the audience said, well, if that's what it takes, he's going to die. No, but it's by any means necessary, so you don't have to do it together. Sex helps well-being for women. There's been a bunch of research. This one I took from a very large study in Australia, but basically the Kinsey Institute and several others have done the same study. If a woman's having a frequent sex life, she's more likely to say she's happy. She's more likely to say be healthy. She's more likely to talk about a higher quality of life. There's no study that comes up with a different finding than this, and there's plenty of studies on this, that sexual satisfaction and fewer sexual problems are highly related to relationship satisfaction, not just sex satisfaction, and vice versa, although the link goes back and forth. So those are just not arguable. There is a difference here, though, and this is an important one. Let's say it's a troubled sexual relationship. And these are research that I've done. If it's a troubled sex relationship, the woman's likely to say, well, I have a good relationship. These were married couples. But our sex relationship isn't so good. If the guy says the same thing, he says they're both not good. So in other words, she's much more likely to think this is a problem within a larger context, and it can be kept as a problem and not affect the larger context. He's more likely to say it's hurting the whole relationship. And she doesn't know that because she's thinking a different way, which obviously creates a more problem. What about sex and love in a dating situation? Let's talk about casual sex for a moment here. I've been talking about deeper things like romance and love, etc. This is basically, I couldn't find you the right card for Valentine's Day. Apparently Walmart doesn't have a thank you for casual sex section. So what's going on in this and how does it affect people? If you look at the hooking up research, basically there's a big gender difference there. And I've written out the more. He's more likely to have more partners. She's more likely to have regrets than him. He's more likely to feel like this was a good deal for both of them. She's more likely to feel disrespected. And there's a huge double standard that goes on in terms of what she's permitted to do without getting a quote-unquote reputation and what he's allowed to do, which is basically anything. She's more likely to have sex because she's affectionate. She wants affection from this person and she's hoping it'll start a relationship. And he's much more likely to say, I want to try it and see, curiosity. So they're very different, which obviously means there's a lot of likelihoods for some emotional pain and some problems in terms of the relationship. Basically, and I won't go into it unless you have me to ask questions, one of the interesting things about this is they're not generally reciprocal. They're not doing the same things to each other, and she's much less likely to have an orgasm than he is. Some people feel this is the new reality and they're not too happy with it. Says, don't you understand? I love you. I need you. I want to spend the rest of my vacation with you. The promises and the meaning of sexuality these days has really modified for people from this is what, you have sex and like it's the beginning of a relationship, or, what it means or what I love you means seems to be highly flexible these days. And here's my personal unfavorite, is this seems to be going on a lot more in colleges, and that is breaking up by email. This has been this one. These are real screenshots from a while ago. But I'm breaking up with you. What? I'm sorry. It's just that I don't feel the same way about you anymore. I think you have the wrong number. Oh, wow. I'm sorry. How awkward. LOL. But you think that's a bad way to tell them? There's been studies that at least a third of people in a random study of college students have been broken up with by email and or have done it themselves. So it's a kind of distancing of relationships that's very much different than what dating used to be. However, people feel they either go through undergraduate school as celibate, because there's many fewer dates than there are hookups in universities around the country. Maybe it's different here, but because it's a school with a maybe more Christian tradition. But in general, I don't see that much difference in some of the religious schools and the state schools. But one reason people participate in hookups, you go, why would women want to do hookups? Because they're less likely to have a good experience out of it. It's because it's about a third of them do lead to relationships. And otherwise, there's not going to be much interaction in undergraduate school in a lot of these schools. Sex doesn't substitute for love, though, obviously. Most people have a goal to find love and commitment, whether they're same-sex couples or opposite-sex couples. The basic idea is that most people really want to marry. More than half of marriages do stay together, so you can talk about the 50% divorce rate. You can always talk about the 50% success rate, or people who stay. Most people who, and one of the proofs of marriage is that most people who divorce do remarry, so they just hated that person, not the next one. New people are now being allowed to marry. New populations have fought for that right and gained it. Same-sex couples, transsexual people. In fact, transsexual people had the right to marry before gay people did because they were now categorized as a heterosexual couple. An older divorce, and there's an interesting thing that, if you want to ask me, I'll go on, but one interesting thing about the divorce rate is that you now have the biggest increase in people over 50. Not that it's the same as young people have a higher divorce rate, but the percentage of people over 50 divorcing is much higher than it used to be. And I sometimes think that that means that the standards of marriage have changed, not to just be together, but because you really want to love and be in a romantic relationship. Why is it getting harder, though, to find that relationship? Now I turn into a sociologist again, and here are some of the things I need to mention. First of all, college-educated people are getting married very late. First serious relationships start popping up 27, 28, cohabiting and or married. So that means that if it doesn't turn out, now people are single again in their 30s when they're not seeing as many eligible people. The divorce rate has stabilized, but these rates have increased, as I mentioned. And people are saying, demographers are saying that about 20 to 25% of women will not marry because of various changes in the demographic picture. People are getting innovative in terms of trying to find ways to be with somebody. People, of course, around the world, some of them still do arranged marriages. I don't know how many of you know that I'm on a TV show called Married at First Sight, where we arrange marriages from people who've never met each other. They meet each other at the altar, they get legally married, and then they have to work on it. Yeah.
You're from Marriage at First Sight?
Yeah. Remember me? I'm on. Yeah. So is that why I sound familiar? Are you okay? Oh, thank you. So we do these marriages. And when we first did it, people say, well, why would anyone do that, right? And we were shocked. We weren't sure ourselves. But we've had over 50,000 people apply to this show to get married with someone they don't know through the way we look at them and we do the matching. For me, what that means is people are really having a rough time out there because, they really feel burnt out and unsuccessful, often very young. And so people are willing to do a lot of things they wouldn't. Still, most people will find love, and I think they will find it and they will want it because it's still a very precious part of one's identity and what one hopes for in one's life. And it includes new populations that would not have been able to do this before. Everybody wants to have somebody who says, I want to spend my life with you. I want to be the most important person. I'm going to be there for you. I'm not going to go when it gets rough. So most people are happy. This is an interesting statistic, though, I think. We asked people, would you risk your life for your partner? 97% of men in a happy marriage said they would. When we asked them, in unhappy marriages, 93% of men said they would risk their life to save their partner, even if they were no longer in love with them. What was interesting is the women's responses. If we asked women in a happy marriage if they would risk their life for their husband. The high number was 78%. And the women in unhappy marriages, well, he's going to die. So it is interesting. We thought about why would this be different, and some of the women said, "Well, look at if I wouldn't be strong enough, to save him from drowning, we'd both go down, or I have the kids and I'd have to be there for them, so I couldn't take the risk." But there was a huge difference. Nonetheless, here's the happy news, and then I'll stop and see if you want to ask questions. 75% of people in this study that had hundreds of thousands of people in it would choose the person they're married to again. 70% said they loved their partner a lot more than when they first got married, and 25% said as much. So that means that the people who are staying married are really pretty happy and devoted. This is also was an international study. How many of you are still extremely attracted to your partner after 20 years? People over 50. The vast majority of them still found themselves very attracted to their partner. So to sum up, this is a complex situation. People want love, they're looking for relationships, they want to be sexually connected, they want to be emotionally connected, but there are many real challenges to it that I think social science and psychological science and biological science can in fact help. But this is the kind of end that I think we all kind of want. This is where the ambition goes, where you see these two people in wheelchairs still nuzzling each other because they're still connected emotionally and physically and still committed. And that's why people try so hard. That's why we study so much. I'll stop there. Thanks.
This love thing is very, very complicated. I am reading a book by this woman named Bell Hooks, and the book is called All About Love. And in the second chapter, she talks about how she uses the word lovelessness, lovelessness a lot throughout the book. And she says that very often a large part of the society rejects love because of fear and chooses to pretend that it's not happening. And she says a lot of that begins to happen in childhood because of how different cultures raise their children. And sometimes it has to do with people saying to their children in childhood, "I'm doing this because I love you," regarding punishments and, those kinds of things. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I find that very astute. And I've read Bell Hooks. I think she's an interesting woman. I don't think she's alive anymore. Am I right? I think she's gone. I might be wrong about that.
I don't know that.
Yeah, she spoke at our university. Oh, right. Sorry. Anyhow, I agree with what you say, and it really it matches up with the attachment literature that I started talking about in the beginning, where, if people, as children, feel that the love that they might have expected from their parent was either not present or punishing, or they were abandoned, or their parent figures were literally physically harsh on them, etc. If love gets confused with punishment, it does have an impact on a lot of people, and it does make some people avoidant of love. It makes them fear it. It makes them angry, with things that they don't even understand where it comes from, but they vent it on the relationship. So yeah, a lot of people start out with real deficits because they have to be their own psychiatrist to understand all these things that went and made it hard for them to love, to give it or receive it. So yeah, I agree with her observations that those things can make a huge difference over a long period of time.
In the chart, attachment styles in relationships, you had 3 columns, and I felt I was crossing over a lot. I wasn't all in one column. I would think that's typical. Yes, or?
I think, right, these are ideal types, right? And I think we're also different under different circumstances. Let's say you were, and this is where I would part company with the true attachment theorists. They think you're kind of, got this like forever. But I think, for example, if you're in a relationship that is very secure, you believe in this person is love, they believe in it, you sort of, let's say you started out like avoidant or insecure, you could become more secure because the reality is more secure, and you could start to trust more, you could start to, be more committed, you could see the commitment come back at you, and vice versa. If you were somebody who was rejecting, up and down, sometimes there for you, sometimes not, you're going to get pretty insecure because you should be, in a way. So I think over time, you're probably reacting to the sources of input from other people that are significant, and that would change you or modify one part, bring it up more, bring it down more. We might have a reflex that we go back to, but in general, I believe that the interaction of somebody with you is going to change who you are, and that means also within the same relationship, when its own fluctuations go on, it could bring different parts of you out.
Could you repeat your golden rules again?
Well, my golden rule, the golden rule from the Bible is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And unfortunately, that sounds like, you only see your own perspective. So I'd say get to know somebody well so you could do unto others as they would have done unto themselves. It's sort of like, if I'm giving love in a way that I like, but it's not what they need, neither one of us are going to be happy.
I had this post saved on my phone for quite some time. I always wanted to try, but I don't hear your thoughts on it. So I'm just going to read it. And so the category is how to fall in love. It says, find a complete stranger, reveal to each other intimate details about your lives for half an hour, then stare deeply into each other's eyes without talking for 4 minutes. York psychologist Professor Arthur Aaron has been studying why people fall in love. He asked his subjects to carry out the above 3 steps and found that many of his couples felt deeply attracted after the 34-minute experiment. Two of his subjects later got married.
So that's a true study.
All right.
He's a well-known love researcher. And the theory is that when you give a lot of personal disclosure and the other person receives it in a sympathetic way, you feel close to them, and that's going to bring you close enough so that if you can then listen to their disclosures and they get the same feeling, and they've already felt special because you've unloaded all this disclosure on them, now they tell it to you, it does make you feel closer. And then there was a New York Times article of a woman, I think in the Modern Love Story, where she tried this out and it worked, and she ended up with the guy. But the disclosure obviously has to be with someone who is like kind of a reasonable person for you to attach to. I mean, if their disclosure is all the things you don't want to hear about somebody, I don't think it's going to work. But the general theory is important, which is it is intimacy, it's intimate disclosure, it's letting somebody really know you. That if other things being equal, that's important, the right class, the right this, the right that, it's likely to pull you together. And it may pull you together enough to go on. But it's not for everyone. Let's say they had 2 people in that class. Let's say the class was 30 people. A certain percent of people were, in fact, drawn to each other. So I think there's something to it. But I don't think it's like do that and home run all the time. No. Yes, sir.
How about love at first sight?
Love at first sight. Some people think that can happen. My mother told me this story when she was alive, that when she saw my father walk into the room, she said to the person next to her, I'm going to marry that guy. So she did. And it was a good marriage. Not one I want to be in personally, but it was a good marriage. And on the other hand, there's many, many stories of someone who says the same thing, not so good. And it doesn't end up, or it shouldn't have ended up, right? So I think there are some things that people have that attract somebody else immediately, and they may feel such an overwhelming pull to that person that they say, I'm in love. And X% of the time, the thing develops, and they are, and then they say, I knew it immediately. But people forget the other side of when they had that immediate attraction, and it was totally foolish. It just, once they knew the person, it wasn't who they felt they were, So I think there are things that I would say there's attraction at first sight. There's definitely people who have a connection immediately. And then the question is what else is in there, if it works out or not. my feeling is she's saying it's lust at first sight, but sometimes I don't think it's just lust. I mean, sometimes I think it's something about that person that might remind you of someone you respected, that has a kind of twinkle in their eye that you want. I mean, it's not just sexual attraction. I think it's attraction. And the lust might be in there, but it's also like something there that pulls you in. And we don't understand it that well, but I do understand that it's not predictive always of anything going more deeply and more meaningfully. But I think it's a combination of things. Sometimes it's just lust at first sight, and then that people then feel it's just lust at first sight, but it's others, they're drawn so emotionally. They think something big has just happened.
We have a few questions from the audience.
Sure.
The first one is, when a man says, "I love you," but he doesn't respond ever when the woman expresses her love, does this mean that this man really doesn't mean "I love you" in the first place, or does he have a hidden agenda?
That's a tough question. It's a great one. So, did you all hear it? Okay. So, he says, "I love you." Was that correctly? And then when she says it back, he doesn't say it back. So what does it mean about the first one? Well, sometimes people don't say it back because they don't want to sound like I'm just saying it because you prompted it. Sometimes a person is feeling like, in the sense, they're being manipulated to say, "I love you" because you said it. And that's their kind of personality. They don't want to be pushed. They don't want to do something that they say is artificial, that they didn't feel. So on the other hand, some people are manipulative, or they just say something when they feel like it, but they're not responsible to it. Today, this moment, this second, I feel like I love you. Does that mean I'm bound by that in any way? No, I just felt like that. Well, for most people, it's not. They're saying, no, I love you means a whole host of other things. But some people use it as a spur-of-the-moment emotion, and it's not to be counted on. You know, I'm a big believer in some ways about, I'm on a show that doesn't believe in time, but I really do believe sometimes you only know what somebody means by knowing them over time. And if what they do doesn't follow what they said, well, then that can tell you what it meant. But I think just the reciprocity at a given moment, while a lot of people do it, they may feel pushed into it in a way that's uncomfortable for them.
Your opening quote illustrates both cynics and romantics. What percentage of the population are romantics, and are love cynics the avoidance and attachment style?
It's a great question, and I don't really have a good answer for what percentage of the society is romantic versus cynics. Probably because we all alternate at different points of our lives. I think that you'll probably find more romantics among young children, you know, I think. But I love that question. I really think it's worth research about how many are. And obviously, cynics have had, either they're more intellectualized or they've had more experience that didn't, you know, that disappointed them. So there may be difference in terms of percentages over lifetime and life chances that differentiate people. There was another part of that. What was it?
Are love cynics the avoidance and attachment style?
That's interesting. Are love cynics avoidance and attachment style? Probably more of a likelihood of that than not, but I don't think it's necessarily so. Sometimes love cynics are protecting themselves, and so it's like an avoidance style, but I don't know if it's consistent.
What do studies show regarding success in interracial couples?
Interracial couples have a higher breakup rate than other couples, but they don't have as high a breakup as they used to. And I can't read, it's just percentages. It's not like, you know, it's somewhat more, but it's not huge. And I can't remember the exact thing, but that's an easy one to find out because there's the U.S. Census takes those kind of stats, and you could find out that they probably have an increased, you know, maybe something 20% more risk than other. But that's true for all mixed couples, whether it's mixed religion, race. Those probably are the two big ones, but they're not determinative. In other words, bigger risk, but not a huge risk more.
The last question is, what does it mean if a person never felt passion?
That's a good question, too. These are all great questions. What does it mean if a person never felt passion? Probably they're depressed. I would say, there's something, it's the kind of thing I would go see someone about, because it could be a number of things. Depression's the likeliest. Life is flat. When you're not happy and you're really depressed, it's pretty hard to feel passion or much of else. It could also be a hormonal issue if it dealt to sexual passion. I think they all talk about low T and things like that. It's rare, but it's not unreal that could be something. So it's either, psychological or physical, and you'd want to take a look at both because most people can feel something. I mean, if the question is, do you feel passionate about food? Do you feel passionate about religion? Do you feel passionate about love? Do you feel passionate about travel? I mean, if none of those things, if you don't have passion somewhere, it doesn't have to all be sexual or whatever, then I would say, life is kind of flat, and I would look for an explanation overall, mood explanation, and not just about romance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.